In the previous lesson we had a look at how we can use flats, which look a bit like this, and sharps, that look a bit like this, to change the pitches of the notes that we're writing down into music and give us access to some of the other notes, like the black notes on the piano, for example. Now, as we start to use this in the music that we're writing down, and also as we start to read music that other people have written, there's a couple of rules about the way we use these symbols that we need to remember. Okay, so here are my three top rules concerning the way that we use sharps and flats or accidentals in the music that we write, but also any music that we're reading. So the first one, is probably the most important one, is that accidentals always appear before the notes that they change. And this is really important just the same way as if you're driving your car down a road and you see a big hole in the road, and then after that hole someone's put a sign saying, "Warning, hole." Because actually by the time you've got to see the sign you've already driven your car into the hole. And so it's kind of useless to have that warning after the hole has appeared in the road. And exactly the same thing is true when we write down music. I've often seen people do something a little bit like this, where they draw their nice sharp sign directly after the notes that they're wanting to change into a sharp. And in one way that kind of makes sense, because they're thinking in their head, right, well I want this note to be a C sharp, so I've drawn my C and now I'm going to draw my sharp. But as we just said, it's kind of too late by the time we get to here to tell us that this is a C sharp, because we've already probably played this C. Regardless of whether we play the violin or the flute, we probably see that C and we're learning. We're almost training ourselves to do exactly that, to instantly play the note of C. So it's much more useful to us if we actually have our accidental sitting before the note. So it goes somewhere in here. That means that whenever we see these two symbols together, we know that we're not just playing a standard ordinary C that we get whenever we see something written in the third space up on the treble clef in this example. We're going to get something slightly different, as in we're going to get something a semitone higher, and play a C sharp. This is much more like sticking the sign "Warning hole" just before the hole, so that when I'm driving along the road I'll see the warning sign and I'll stop my car or drive around the hole or something like that. So it's really important to remember whenever we're writing music that the accidental symbols should always come before the notes that they change. And also it's really useful to remember when we're reading music that we can expect to see any instructions about special flat or sharp notes are going to be before those notes in the music and not afterwards. The second rule regarding flats and sharps or accidentals is that they last for the whole bar in which they occur. So let's look at an example of this. So say I write a C sharp here. I'm going to remember to put it before the note it changes, right here. I've now made this note into a C sharp. So not only are we saying that this C is a C sharp, we're actually saying that every C that sits in this bar, which is everything between this vertical line and this vertical line, is also going to be a C sharp. And the reason for this is oftentimes when we start to use these accidentals, they're very rarely on their own. Actually the music has changed, or the music has moved slightly, so that we're going to want to use a different set of notes to the one that we were using before. So the idea of this is that it saves us a bit of time, so that we don't have to go out and write in laboriously a sharp on every other note of the same pitch that we're using in that particular bar. So if we go along here, we'll see that here we've also got a C. And even though I'm not going to write a sharp symbol next to it, when we read it we have to remember that this is also a sharp. Because rule number 2 says accidentals last for the whole bar in which they occur. So we've changed this C by writing a sharp sign next to it, but we also have to remember that we've changed every other C in the bar. It's also really important to remember that it does just last for the whole bar, and so when we go into the next bar, all of those accidental symbols are cancelled out. So you will see we've got a C here, and while before, in this bar, we were playing them as C sharps, we now need to remember that it's returned back to a normal white note C natural. And so the final rule that we're going to be looking at when we use accidentals or flat and sharp symbols relates to how we use these symbols when we write down music for ourselves. It's really important that we write these symbols down in the correct way, so that when people are playing our music, they do what we want rather than something else. So to make it really clear exactly which notes our accidentals refer to, there are kind of conventions about exactly where they should fit on the staff. Okay, so if we want to write a flat symbol next to this D, the idea is that we will write the flat symbol so that the line that goes through the note head of the D also goes through the sort of whole open bit of the flat. So we see the lines going right the way through the sort of circular bit of the flat symbol. If we're trying to write a flat symbol next to a note that sits in a space, we then try and write it so that the rounded bit of the flat symbol sits exactly in the space. So I've not drawn it very well there, but you can see that the sort of rounded bit of the flat symbol sits exactly in the space, and I think the more we get used to reading music, the more we kind of need that there. So for example, if we're trying to write this as an A flat, it's going to confuse our reader perhaps if we write the symbol so that it's up there, because it just doesn't quite look right to us, and you get used to recognizing what looks right and what doesn't look right. And not surprisingly, there are some rules around the way we write sharp symbols into music that we're writing down as well, very similar to those relating to flats. All we have to do is make sure that if we're writing a sharp symbol next to a note that sits on a line, we make sure, we said before that it looks a little bit like a noughts and crosses board. We just have to make sure that the middle of the noughts and crosses board has the line cutting through it. So it's exactly what we've done here. We can see that the D has the line going through it, and so does the sharp symbol that makes that note into a D sharp. And we can do exactly the same thing down here with this A. We're going to write an A sharp by, again, noughts and crosses board, but this time, because we're writing in a space, we're going to make sure that the centre of the noughts and crosses board sits exactly in that space. And so again, when you have musicians playing this music, they'll really, really thank you if all of the accidental symbols are in the right place.